Hi, everyone. So we have our lesson 6. This will be happening over 2 days. The objective is to review solving systems of equations using all three methods and how to model situations with those linear equations so that we can then solve. Now, here's what your task is. Your task is to complete this play pause it video over the next 2 class periods. The interactives will no longer walk you through step by step as they have in the past, and will only ask you to answer the final question. So if you have the final question incorrect, this is why it's going to be really important that you upload your work at the end of each class period so that I can see if it was a minor miscalculation or maybe a deeper misunderstanding that I have to address with you personally. So remember, all work must be shown in the notebook. Define your variables, write the system, solve the system using any of the methods, elimination, substitution. If you'd like, you can even graph. And the solution should be written as a sentence. Now, at the end of the first class period, as I just said, I want you to upload what you've completed. So since this is over 2 days, I want to see what you did the first day. And then at the end of the second class period, I want to see what you did the second day. Now notice that step 4, I also ask you to make the corrections because after each question, I will then go over it with you as an answer key, and I want you to make those corrections in your notebook. Use a different color pencil and specify which color represents the corrections. All right. So I tell you about how long each one should take. Here is practice 1. So as you see, these questions are a little more intensive. Now, I solved the system in part A. I arrived at the answer that it costs $14.95 for the work and $1.50 per liter. Notice that I have 2 variables defined there, X and Y. Part B then asks us to write an equation for the overall cost of the oil. Now notice I needed 2 new variables. I used C for the overall cost and N for the number of liters. I realized that this could also be modeled using the slope-intercept form. And then I used that equation in part C to determine that a car that needs 2 liters of oil will cost 17 euros and 95 cents. So these questions that I'm going to have are multi-part. Some I break down in A, B, C, others I do not. Let's go on to practice 2. Here's practice 2. Go ahead. Here is the answer to practice 2. So I used elimination and I multiplied the first equation by 3, which resulted in the orange one. So look at the color coding. I multiplied the second one by 2. This way I created a common coefficient of 6 for the y term, and I was able to then use subtraction. I was then able to arrive at the answer that a soccer ball costs $14.50 and a bag costs 5. Now, I did elimination by eliminating the y term. You could have also eliminated the x term. There's many different ways to arrive to the solution that's in the sentence. I then use this in part B to figure out that the cost of 7 soccer balls and 2 bags will cost 111 euros and 50 cents. Now, there's many ways that you could have arrived at that answer, and you must just show the work that you got there. For example, you could have also noticed that one coach had purchased the 10 soccer balls and 2 soccer ball bags. That means the bags are already in the cost of 155. The only thing that you have to subtract from the 155 are the 3 additional soccer balls, which we know as 1450. You multiply 1450 by 3, subtract that from 155, and you again would arrive at the answer 111 euros and 50 cents. There's practice problem 2. Here's practice problem 3. Make sure that you read it carefully, that you understand what the tables all represent, and see how I've asked you to define X. Go ahead. Now for part A and B, there could have been multiple answers to this. So if I see that you have a different answer, because maybe you use point slope form, this is why it's important that you upload your notes. And I will also mark it correct if I see that you've just used a different form. Now notice that I started over here by actually writing my ordered pairs, because since we asked for years after 1960, that means 1960 is 0. That's our y-intercept. So I was able to use that. So part A asks for the kids living without adults. That's the second table. I was able to use the slope formula, find the slope. And then I already had the y-intercept. It was 5. So I just plugged it in. Again, you could have used point slope form. I used the same approach for part B to get the equation without. Well, because they were both solved for y, I ended up just setting them equal. I substituted, and that's what you see in C. Now, right here, you'll see that I added 20/48 instead of 5/12. Well, 20/48 is the same. And back over here, when I had reduced it, I knew that it was the same as negative 20/48. And therefore, I could have a common denominator to make the addition much more manageable. Oh, I forgot my x in my work, though. I was then able to solve for x, which found that x was about 69.5. But no matter what, I asked what year. 69.5 is still in the 69th year after 1960, which is 2029. I used that to get that it was about 18% of adults will be living with children and without. So that's the answer to practice problem 3. Here is practice problem 4. Notice that I don't give parts A, B, and C. You have to decide what steps you might have to do to get to the final answer. Go ahead. Here's your answer to practice problem 4. I also labeled them in the order that I went about it. So I started with defining my variable. I then wrote my equation. Now I understand that this statement right here might have been a little tricky. They sell twice as many bags of popcorn as pretzel. Well, when you're setting up the equation, you might have accidentally written 2x equals y. Well, think about what's happening here. If they sell twice as many bags of popcorn, that means there has to be more popcorn. So that means we have to alter the pretzels by making them larger to get to popcorn, hence 2y, or go in the reverse, hence the green where I divided by 2. Then I used substitution. I used the black equation, and I got that y equals 48. I then used this to get 96. Now, go back and check. If you had accidentally written the other equation, you would have gotten different answers. And it wouldn't have made sense because we know that more bags of popcorn were sold. And so, as we see, more bags of popcorn were sold. Here is practice problem 5. Go ahead. Here is the answer to practice 5. Now, since we're given a percentage, we have to turn that percentage into a decimal before we can actually use it, and therefore 6% therefore became a 0.06, and 3% became a 0.03. When I solved it, I arrived at this answer, and notice that I didn't round, and I used it in the equation. If you rounded, you might have gotten something slightly different. So if I sell $16,666.67 at either job, I'll earn the same amount. All right. Here is practice problem 6. Here is the answer to practice 6. I hope you're starting to see some structure between the types of questions that you might appear or the structure of the equations that you set up. Now I solved this by elimination. Doesn't mean you have to. You could have done this one by substitution. Both methods would have arrived at the same answer, that I have 22 tubes for people and 4 for food and water. Don't forget that you're making these corrections as you go, just in case. Practice 7. Go ahead. Here's the answer to practice 7. As I was saying, there are different ways to go about solving it. This way I did substitution just so that you can see the different methods of solving. Again, you could have done elimination and you would have arrived to the same answer. All right. Here is practice 8. Here's the answer to practice 8. Notice again, I labeled them. Now, I wanted you guys to see something because we've always multiplied for elimination, but division is just the inverse of that. So as you see in orange, instead of multiplying one of the equations to do elimination, I saw that I could divide by 2. This resulted in 2x plus y equals 13, the equation in orange. And this therefore created the common coefficient of 1 for y, and I was able to subtract those. So it's whatever I do to the equation, as long as I do it to everything, that's okay. Now, I then figured out what Maya purchased, but the question asked, what does Ross spend if he purchased double the hardcover and the same number of paperback books? I was able to do the mathematics there, knowing the cost, and see that Ross paid $46. That's practice 8. We have 2 more. Here is practice problem 9. Remember, think about percentages. Here's practice problem 9. So my 6% that I earn on X plus the 8.5% that I earned on Y resulted in the final $2,000 that I earned. So I was able to then, I used elimination. I solved for the amounts in each account. And in this case, that was the end of the question. Let's go on to the last and final practice. Here is practice 10. Again, read carefully about how I define what X is. Go ahead. Here's our last practice problem. Again, I wrote the ordered pairs that I can get from the table since it's years since 2000. 98 was -2. 2002 was a value of 2. I determined the slopes, and I wrote the equations in point-slope form. Now you'll see that those forms aren't easy for substitution or elimination, so I put them both into slope-intercept form. That's the orange and green. I then used substitution to set the 2 equations equal, determined that in the year about 5.27, which is after 2000, so it's 2005, it was 84.54 trillion BTUs of both solar and wind used. So those are our 10 practice problems. Hopefully the first few might have been challenging, but hopefully as we went through them, we got a little more confidence on it. If you have any questions on any of them, make sure you ask me. And now upload your final document with all of the corrections to Google Classroom. Bye, everyone.